And at number 10, we unravel the plot where a decorated Air Force sergeant decided his wife and children were nothing more than obstacles to a new beginning. A single, brutal night that involved a crowbar, a machete, and a desperate flight across the continent. Stay tuned, because the true motive wasn't passion, but the cold calculation of an utterly self-absorbed man. Number 10. Edward J. Zakrzewski II, the sergeant's new life plot. The date, June 9, 1994. The victims, his wife, Laura Zakrzewski, and their 2 young children. The event, U.S. Air Force sergeant murdered his wife and 2 children with a crowbar and machete, fled before later surrendering. The early 1990s were a time of relative quiet for American military families, especially those stationed in the peaceful suburbs of San Antonio, Texas. Edward J. Zakrzewski II, a U.S. Air Force sergeant, embodied the image of stability: a uniform, a mortgage, a wife named Laura, and 2 small children. He was an authority figure, a man others trusted. But behind the crisp uniform and the white picket fence of their home on the Lackland Air Force Base, Zakrzewski was nursing a desperate obsession. He was trapped. He wanted a divorce, a clean break, and a new life. Laura, however, had resisted, unwilling to destroy their family unit, or perhaps simply unwilling to let him walk away cleanly. To Zakrzewski, this resistance was not a plea for reconciliation, it was an obstacle. And he decided the only way to remove the obstacles was to erase the entire foundation of his current life. The decision was cold, methodical, and utterly devoid of passion. It wasn't about rage, it was about efficiency. The night of June 9, 1994 became his execution timeline. The family was asleep. The method of the crime speaks to its chilling intent. He chose weapons of silence and brutality. Zakrzewski first went to his wife, Laura. Using a crowbar, he inflicted the first crushing blows. The violence was staggering, designed to ensure silence and finality. He then escalated the attack, using a machete to complete the gruesome act. But his horrifying work wasn't finished. He then moved on to the rooms of his own children. The details are too visceral to recount fully, but the violence used against the 2 innocents mirrored the calculated brutality used against their mother. This was not a moment of uncontrolled rage. This was a man fulfilling a terrible, murderous itinerary. When the carnage was complete, Zakrzewski did not wait for the sun to rise. He did not call for help. Instead, he carefully covered his tracks, loaded his belongings, and began a desperate cross-country flight. He was running, but he wasn't running from the police. He was running from the horrifying reality of what he had done, trying to restart his new life before the old one caught up to him. The discovery of the bodies was made when Laura failed to show up for work. The crime scene was immediately recognized as a planned family annihilation. A massive manhunt was launched for the missing Air Force sergeant. The net began to close quickly. Zakrzewski realized the freedom he craved was a myth. Days later, facing an inevitable capture, he turned himself into authorities in Florida. During his confession, the psychological profile that emerged was utterly chilling. The motive wasn't debt, jealousy, or a sudden mental break. It was pure, selfish convenience. He viewed his family as disposable possessions standing between him and a future he felt entitled to. The subsequent trial solidified his image as one of the most calculated domestic killers. The jury didn't see a father who snapped. They saw a man who plotted and executed. Edward J. Zakrzewski II was ultimately convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment, ensuring the new life he so desperately craved would be spent entirely within the confines of a maximum security prison. Zakrzewski's crime was a meticulous blueprint for escaping one's responsibilities. But what happens when the escape is driven not by convenience, but by a delusional, drug-fueled rage that turns a man into a monster who broadcasts his depravity on a 911 call? And who was the little boy whose incredible testimony brought his own father to justice? That question, which involves a mother's last desperate breath and a daughter's final scream, awaits us later in this countdown. But first, if you find this dive into the absolute worst betrayal compelling, take a moment to subscribe and comment below where you are watching from. Which of these 10 plots do you find the most shocking? Number 9. Ronnie O'Neal III, The Nightmare Witness. The date, March 18, 2018. The attack, the mother of his 2 children, Kenyatta Barron, and their 9-year-old daughter. The event, fatally shot Kenyatta and brutally killed their 9-year-old daughter. His son survived and testified. In Riverview, Florida, the life of Ronnie O'Neal III seemed like a troubled but recoverable story. But beneath the surface of domestic disputes and personal frustrations, something far more sinister was fermenting. O'Neal was increasingly paranoid, erratic, and deeply violent, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of drugs and delusional thinking. The night of March 18, 2018 was not a sudden explosion of temper. It was the catastrophic climax of a downward spiral, meticulously documented by police later through the most horrifying audio evidence imaginable. The violence began with an argument, but O'Neal quickly moved past threats into deadly action. He attacked the mother of his 2 children, Kenyatta Barron. He beat her mercilessly and then used a shotgun to shoot her dead. The cold-blooded murder of Kenyatta was only the beginning of his horrific rampage. His 2 children, a 9-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, were present. They were not simply witnesses, they were next on his monstrous list. He viciously assaulted his son, inflicting severe stab wounds. But the most gut-wrenching moment of the night was the brutal, deliberate murder of his daughter, whom he killed with an axe. What makes this case truly unique and utterly chilling is the audio record. O'Neal himself called 911 during the attack. The dispatcher on the line heard the horrific, confused sounds of the struggle, the screams, the terrifying voice of O'Neal, and the sound of his children pleading for their lives. At one point, he told the dispatcher he had been shot, a lie designed to confuse the police, all while the violence was escalating in the background. When law enforcement arrived, they encountered a chaotic and bloody scene. Kenyatta Barron was dead. The daughter was also dead. The 8-year-old son, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds, was miraculously still alive. He was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries, but survived. O'Neal was apprehended at the scene. He exhibited a bizarre combination of aggression, denial, and megalomania, claiming he was set up and that he was a victim. The subsequent trial, which took place in 2021, became a terrifying spectacle. O'Neal insisted on representing himself for large portions of the proceedings, treating the courtroom like a personal stage. He delivered rambling, accusatory opening statements and bizarre paranoid examinations. But the most powerful testimony came from the one person who survived his attack: his young son. The boy, still dealing with the trauma and the physical scars of the night, took the stand. His testimony was clear, simple, and devastating. He described his father's actions, confirming the prosecutor's timeline of violence and providing the jury with the raw, undeniable truth of what happened inside that home. He was the only witness to survive, and the one piece of evidence Ronnie O'Neal III couldn't twist or deny. The jury was unanimous. Ronnie O'Neal III was convicted on multiple counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder. The jury recommended, and the judge agreed, to a life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The case of Ronnie O'Neill III is a horrific testament to the resilience of a child witness, and the undeniable fact that sometimes the true victim is the one who survives to tell the story, ensuring the world knows the evil that resided behind the title of father. The evidence against O'Neill was overwhelming, thanks to his son. But what about the father who left no witnesses and whose crimes were hidden for decades? A man who wasn't driven by drugs or paranoia, but by a systematic, cold-blooded desire for absolute, incestuous control over his own daughter, locking her away in a secret dungeon for 24 years. Next, we journey to Austria, where the cellar of a seemingly normal family home concealed a secret so monstrous it redefined the limits of human depravity. Number 8. Josef Fritzl, the Cellar of Absolute Control. The date, Captivity exposed April 2008, abuse began in the 1980s. The victims, his daughter, Elizabeth Fritzl, and the children he fathered with her. The event kept his daughter imprisoned in a cellar for 24 years, repeatedly raped her and fathered children with her, exposed and arrested in 2008. The Austrian town of Amstetten seemed, on the surface, unremarkable. The Fritzl house was a modest two-story dwelling, one of thousands across Europe. Josef Fritzl, an electrical engineer, was a husband, a father of 7, and a man known to his neighbors only as somewhat strict and controlling. No one could have conceived that beneath this veneer of normalcy, a subterranean nightmare was unfolding. The abuse began long before the captivity, but in 1984, Fritzl's control became absolute. His daughter, Elizabeth, was just 18 years old. Using a combination of deceit and brutal force, he locked her in a hidden, windowless cell he had meticulously constructed beneath his own home. The space was a terrifying monument to his control. Hidden behind a reinforced concrete and steel door, it was small, damp, and soundproof. It was here, in this literal prison, that Elizabeth would spend the next 24 years of her life. To the outside world, Elizabeth had simply run away. Fritzl had manufactured a note claiming she had joined a religious cult and wished to be left alone. His wife Rosemary and the other children lived their lives upstairs, completely unaware of the horror just a few feet below their kitchen floor. Over those 2.5 decades, Elizabeth Fritzl's existence was reduced to one of unimaginable suffering. Her father was her jailer, her abuser, and, horrifyingly, the father of the 7 children she was forced to bear in the dark, cramped confines of the cellar. 3 of these children, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, never saw the light of day until the plot was exposed. They grew up entirely underground, without education, medical care, or any concept of the world above. 3 other children were brought upstairs by Fritzl and raised by him and Rosemary, who was told they were abandoned by the missing Elizabeth. 1 child died shortly after birth. The plot was a masterpiece of domestic psychological terror. Fritzl maintained the delusion for 24 years through constant threats, meticulous maintenance of the hidden entrance, and the sheer, chilling banality of his routine. He went to work, interacted with his family, and occasionally brought food and supplies to the hidden dungeon. The unraveling began in April 2008, when the oldest of the Cellar children, Kirsten, became gravely ill. Elizabeth managed to convince her father that Kirsten needed urgent medical care, something only a hospital could provide. Fritzl, panicked by the thought of a death on his property, allowed Kirsten to be taken to a local hospital. He then, under duress from Elizabeth, brought the other 2 Cellar children upstairs and eventually brought Elizabeth herself, claiming she had returned. But the medical staff at the hospital found Kirsten's condition suspicious. they issued a public plea to find her mother. This prompted an investigation, and eventually the police brought Fritzl and Elizabeth in for questioning. It was in the police station that Elizabeth finally broke her 24-year silence. With the guarantee that she would never have to see her father again, she revealed the unbelievable, monstrous truth. She led police to the hidden door, and they descended into the literal darkness of the cellar. The exposure was an international sensation. Josef Fritzl was immediately arrested. The physical evidence, the years of documented medical neglect, the DNA proof of paternity, and the hidden, horrifying structure were irrefutable. Fritzl's trial was a global media event. Initially, he pleaded guilty to only incest, but under the weight of the evidence and the harrowing testimony, he eventually pleaded guilty to all charges, including murder by neglect for the infant that died and enslavement for keeping his daughter captive. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a special facility for the criminally insane. The Josef Fritzl case stands as a terrifying reminder that the greatest evil can sometimes be hidden just a few feet away, maintained by a father's absolute, unwavering need for control. Fritzl's plot was a calculated act of domestic terror hidden beneath a suburban home. But what about the men whose plot was driven not by isolation, but by a manic, public act of desperation? Next, we head to Argentina, where a respected dentist decided to eliminate every female member of his household, his wife, his 2 daughters, and his mother-in-law, before fabricating a chaotic story to cover his tracks. The question remains, why would a successful, educated man erase his entire female line in a single, brutal hour? Comment below with your theories, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive documentaries. Number 7. Ricardo Barreda, the Dentist's Fury. The date, November 15, 1992. The victims, his wife, Gladys McDonald, his 2 daughters, Cecilia and Adriana, and his mother-in-law, Elena Areche. The event, Argentine dentist who murdered his wife, 2 daughters, and his mother-in-law. La Plata, Argentina was home to Ricardo Barreda, a seemingly successful middle-class dentist. To the outside world, he was a professional man, a father, and the head of a multi-generational household. But inside the home, a different reality festered, one of constant, grinding emotional abuse directed at Barreda by the 4 women who lived there. He was the lone male, living with his wife Gladys, his 2 adult daughters, Cecilia and Adriana, and his mother-in-law, Elena Areche. He claimed later that he was the constant target of ridicule, mockery, and outright cruelty. The words, he felt, had become physical blows, chipping away at his self-esteem and masculinity. This emotional cooker pressure finally exploded on the morning of Sunday, November 15th. Barreda, pushed to the brink by what he perceived as an unbearable provocation, snapped. But the subsequent violence was not a mere flash of anger. It was a comprehensive, targeted annihilation. He went to his study, retrieved a 16-gauge double-barreled shotgun, and began his murderous rampage. His first target was his mother-in-law, Elena Areche. He shot her in the head. Next, his wife Gladys McDonald was shot. He then proceeded to systematically hunt down and kill his 2 daughters, Cecilia and Adriana. All 4 women were dead within minutes. This was a classic and complete familicide. But the crime wasn't over. Barreda's plot included an escape and a cover-up. Following the murders, Barreda meticulously staged the scene to resemble a robbery gone wrong. He scattered objects, took a few minor valuables, and then drove his car out of La Plata seeking to establish an alibi. He even called the police from a gas station, reporting that he couldn't get into his house and was concerned about a break-in. When the police arrived, They found the gruesome scene exactly as Barreda had described: a ransacked house and 4 dead women. The initial investigation focused on outside perpetrators. However, the police quickly grew suspicious of the grieving husband. The narrative of the robbery didn't quite fit the specific and singular brutality of the attack. Furthermore, the type of weapon used was highly specific, and Barreda's emotional reaction seemed flat, almost rehearsed. Within days, under questioning, the fragile plot began to crumble. Barreda's story changed, and the police found discrepancies in his timeline. Finally, cornered by the evidence and the weight of his actions, Barreda confessed to the entire calculated attack. He provided the horrifying details of how he methodically killed each woman, driven by a deep-seated hatred and a twisted sense of revenge for years of humiliation. Barreda's plot was rooted in years of emotional damage and self-pity. But what about the father whose self-destruct
plot was a perfect storm of debt, infidelity, and an overwhelming desire to start fresh? A man who, in the middle of the night, decided to eliminate his wife and 2 young daughters before creating a massive lie about their disappearance. Next, we dive into the most publicized case of domestic betrayal in modern memory, the tragedy of Chris Watts, a case where a simple search warrant exposed the most cold-blooded family killer in recent history. Number 6. Chris Watts, the illusion of perfection. The date, August 2018. The victims, his pregnant wife, Shan'ann Watts, and their 2 young daughters, Bella and Celeste. The event, murdered his pregnant wife and their 2 young daughters, then attempted to hide the crimes, confessed, and was sentenced to life. The world knew Chris Watts and his family through a lens of filtered perfection. Shan'ann Watts, his wife, was an active presence on social media, often posting pictures of her beautiful life, a loving husband, 2 adorable young daughters, Bella 4 and Celeste 3, and the exciting news that she was pregnant with their 3rd child, a son. They were the modern American dream, living in a beautiful home in Frederick, Colorado. But the picture was a lie. Behind the smiles, Chris Watts was spiraling. He was having an affair, was deeply dissatisfied with his marriage, and was becoming increasingly resentful of his responsibilities as a father. To him, the family was not a blessing, but a cage. His solution was not divorce. It was annihilation. In the early morning hours of August 13, 2018, Chris Watts executed his terrible plan. The details of the crime, later revealed through his own confession, are horrific. He murdered his pregnant wife. He then loaded her body along with the 2 still living children into his work truck and drove them to a remote oil field where he worked. It was here, in the isolated, empty landscape, that he completed his calculated plan. He killed his daughters, Bella and Celeste, and disposed of their small bodies by stuffing them into oil tanks before burying Shan'ann nearby. He then returned home and went about his day as if nothing had happened. The plot unraveled instantly. Shan'ann was reported missing, and Chris Watts played the role of the distraught, confused husband to perfection, appearing on local news appealing for his family's safe return. His performance was compelling, but his behavior was full of micro-tells that only sharp investigators and close friends noticed. He was too calm, too quick to ask questions, and seemed overly concerned about controlling the narrative. The investigators quickly focused on Chris. Their suspicions were cemented when they found evidence of his affair and his rising dissatisfaction with his life. The turning point came when a detective noticed that Watts was not acting like a desperate man, but a man relieved. Faced with mounting forensic evidence, Watts finally confessed. His initial lies were quickly replaced by the horrifying truth. He killed Shan'ann after an argument, and then, in cold blood, killed the 2 children who were still alive in the truck. The true motive, according to investigators, was pure, cold-blooded self-interest. He wanted his mistress and his new free life. His family was simply an obstruction to be eliminated. Chris Watts was convicted and sentenced to 5 life sentences plus 48 years without parole. His crime shocked the world, not just for its brutality, but for the devastating clarity of its motive. A father's choice of convenience over compassion, a lie of perfection that hid a heart of absolute evil. Chris Watts's plot was a failure of modern convenience, the use of social media to build a perfect life that was utterly hollow. But what about the father whose self-destruction was so complete, he decided to take his entire extended family with him, eliminating 5 children, his wife, and a relative in a single devastating familicide? And what deep-seated, hidden shame drove him to this final, desperate act? That answer, which involves a suicide note and a terrible holiday morning, is coming up soon. Comment below and tell me where you are watching from right now. Number 5. Michael Haight, The Holiday Annihilation. The date, January 4th, 2023. The victims, his wife, Tasha Haight, his 5 children, and his mother-in-law, Gail Earl. The event, shot and killed his wife, 5 children, and a relative in a familicide in Utah, then died by suicide. Enoch, Utah is a small, tight-knit community defined by conservative values and strong family units. Michael Haight, a licensed insurance agent, and his wife Tasha were well known. They had 7 children, though the crime involved the 5 children who were still living at home. Their marriage, however, was failing. Tasha Haight had filed for divorce just 2 weeks before the massacre. She had clearly reached her limit with her husband, citing escalating domestic issues and a hostile environment. This decision, the simple act of seeking a legal end to their marriage, was perceived by Michael Haight not as a separation, but as a total collapse of his power and identity. His plot was driven by a need for ultimate revenge and control. If he couldn't have his family on his terms, no one would have them. It was a terrifying ultimatum delivered with a firearm. The night of January 4th, 2023 was the final night of his wife's temporary restraining order, which had been put in place during the divorce proceedings. It was also the night Michael Haight chose to execute his terrible plan. Armed with a handgun, he began his rampage in the quiet hours before dawn. He systematically moved through the house, shooting and killing his wife, Tasha, her mother-in-law, Gail Earl, and his 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys, ranging in age from 4 to 17. This was not a double murder or a triple murder. This was a mass annihilation of an entire bloodline. 7 people were murdered in cold blood. When the plot was complete, Michael Haight turned the gun on himself, dying by suicide. He ensured that no one survived to speak against him, and no one would ever know his side of the story, save for the chilling suicide note he left behind. The note, which was recovered by investigators, confirmed the motive. He blamed his wife and her family for the demise of his marriage and felt he had been wronged. His actions were, in his twisted view, justified retaliation for the loss of his authority. The discovery was made by police conducting a welfare check. They found a scene of unimaginable horror. The sheer scale of the tragedy, 8 bodies in total, including 5 young children, sent shockwaves across the country and the world. The case of Michael Haight serves as a grim example of how a man's need for domestic control, when threatened by divorce or independence, can be amplified into a catastrophe of biblical proportions. His final act was not merely murder, it was the ultimate, selfish assertion of power over the lives he claimed to love. Haight's final plot was driven by divorce papers, a visible end to his illusion of control. But what about the father whose plot was just as systematic but driven by a strange, desperate fantasy of starting over with the money? Next, we head back to the 1970s, to a story of a quiet church treasurer who methodically murdered his entire family, wrote a fake letter and vanished for 18 years. He wasn't found because of forensics, but because of a single small coincidence in a completely different life. Where are you watching from? Comment and tell me if you believe an evil father can ever truly escape their past.
Number 4. John List, the Ghost of Westfield. The date, November 9, 1971. The victims, his wife, Helen, his mother, Alma, and his 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. The event shot and killed his wife, mother, and 3 children in their Westfield, New Jersey home. The town of Westfield, New Jersey was utterly unprepared for the crime that would define its history. John List was a man of stern religious conviction. He was a church treasurer, a Sunday school teacher, and a seemingly devoted husband and father. He lived with his wife, Helen, his elderly mother, Alma, and his 3 teenage children in a beautiful 19-room Victorian mansion known as Breeznall. But John List was sinking. He had lost his lucrative job and, driven by overwhelming pride and an inability to ask for help, was quickly running out of money. The family's large home was mortgaged and their savings depleted. To List, a man obsessed with appearances and religious salvation, bankruptcy and public failure were far worse than death. He saw only one way out, a mercy killing to save his family's souls from the coming disgrace. In his twisted mind, he was preventing them from suffering financial ruin and the moral decay that he believed accompanied poverty. The plot was clinical. Over the course of the day on November 9, 1971, John List executed his family in cold blood. He began by shooting his wife Helen and his mother Alma. He then waited patiently for his children to return home from school. As each of his 3 teenage children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, arrived, he greeted them, led them to the ballroom, and shot them one by one. Then he carefully carried all 5 bodies into the ballroom, placing them in sleeping bags and leaving the house lights on. The planning that followed was meticulous. List wrote a 5-page letter to his pastor, explaining his actions as a necessary moral intervention. He canceled all milk deliveries, subscriptions, and utility service. He even adjusted the thermostat to keep the house cool, delaying the inevitable decomposition and discovery of the bodies. Finally, he cut his own face out of every photograph in the house, symbolically erasing his presence. John List simply walked out, vanished, and began a new life. The crime went undiscovered for a shocking month. The neighbors assumed the List family was simply on vacation. It was only when the utility companies, alerted to the lack of payment, finally entered the house that the 5 bodies were discovered in the darkened ballroom. The ensuing manhunt was one of the largest in American history. List had expertly created a new identity and disappeared into the vastness of the country. For 18 years, the case remained unsolved. The Victorian mansion, the scene of the unspeakable crime, burned down under suspicious circumstances a year later. John List had become the ghost of Westfield. The break came in 1989, not through advanced forensics, but through the media. The America's Most Wanted show featured the case, commissioning a forensic artist to create an age-progressed bust of what John List would look like nearly 2 decades later. A woman in Denver, Virginia saw the bust and realized it was her neighbor, a man named Robert Clark. John List, living as Robert Clark since 1972, had remarried, lived a quiet life, and was working as an accountant. He was arrested immediately. List initially denied it, but the fingerprints were undeniable. He was brought back to New Jersey, confessed to the murders, and maintained until his death in prison in 2008 that he had only killed his family to save their souls. List's plot stands as a terrifying portrait of self-deception and control, a man who saw mass murder as the only acceptable solution to a personal financial problem. List's plot was a religious zealot's twisted logic to escape debt.
But what about the father whose self-pity and entitlement were so vast he decided his children should die so he could pursue his new romance? Next, we head to Michigan, where a respected executive plotted a horrifying crash to murder his 4 children, a plot so cynical that he was the only survivor. How did the prosecution prove that the crash was not an accident, but a premeditated act of murder? Subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Number 3. Lawrence DeLisle, The River's Deadly Secret. The date, August 3, 1989. The victims, his 4 children, Melissa, Brian, Catherine, and Emily. The event drove his family's station wagon into the Detroit River, drowning his 4 children. Convicted of murder. Lawrence DeLisle was a respected tire company executive who lived a comfortable life in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan. He had a wife, Suzanne, and 4 young children. He projected the image of a successful, upward mobile American dad. But, like many of the men on this list, his reality was fracturing. He was struggling with significant financial debt, and more critically, he was having an affair. He had convinced himself that his new life, his new relationship, could only begin if his old life, his 4 children, who represented the ultimate tie to his marriage, was completely erased. His plot was chillingly in its cynical simplicity. A fatal accident. On the night of August 3, 1989, Lawrence DeLisle packed his wife and all 4 children into the family station wagon for a supposed late-night run for food. His wife was asleep, and the 4 children, aged 8 down to 18 months, were strapped into their seats. DeLisle drove the car onto a dead-end street that led directly to the Detroit River. At the end of the street, he floored the accelerator, driving the station wagon over the curb and plunging it into the icy blackness of the river. The impact instantly awoke his wife. DeLisle quickly exited the car and swam to shore. He claimed later that he was desperate to save his family, but the door on his side was the only one that opened. Suzanne was rescued from the sinking car by divers and passers-by, but it was too late for the children. All 4 small bodies, Melissa, Brian, Catherine, and Emily, were recovered from the submerged vehicle. They had all drowned. DeLisle played the role of the distraught, traumatized father and victim. His story was that he had a sudden, debilitating leg cramp, causing him to lose control of the car and accidentally drive into the water. However, investigators were immediately suspicious. The evidence against him was circumstantial, but overwhelming. The tide of the river, the specific trajectory of the car, and the fact that DeLisle was the only one to survive unscathed, all pointed towards a deliberate act. The engine was checked and found to be working perfectly. The prosecution's case centered on a critical piece of evidence, the path of the car. An accident expert testified that for the car to end up where it did, DeLisle would have had to accelerate and steer sharply to the left, an action inconsistent with a driver losing control due to a cramp. The key testimony, however, was psychological. It was revealed that DeLisle had taken out a life insurance policy on his children shortly before the incident. More damningly, his mistress was called to testify, revealing the extent of his desperation to break free from his marriage and financial burdens. The jury concluded that DeLisle did not suffer a cramp. He suffered a complete moral failure. The crash was not an accident. It was a premeditated act of murder designed to look like a tragedy. Lawrence DeLisle was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. His plot, an attempt to trade 4 lives for financial freedom and a new romance, landed him in prison for the rest of his life. A chilling cautionary tale of how deep self-interest can run. DeLisle's plot was exposed through forensic evidence of acceleration. But what about the man whose plot was so complete, so pervasive, that it involved a week-long, calculated killing spree that systematically eliminated 14 members of his own family? And what terrifying delusional conviction drove this former military veteran to commit one of the worst instances of familicide in American history?
That answer, which involves a brutal Christmas week, a remote trailer park, and a desperate search for redemption, is coming up at number 2. Comment and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this countdown. Number 2. Ronald Gene Simmons, The Christmas Massacre. The date, December 22nd to December 28th, 1987. The victims, 14 members of his own family, plus 2 others. The event went on a week-long killing spree that included 14 members of his own family, plus 2 others. Dover, Arkansas, a quiet small town, became the epicenter of a nightmare in late December 1987. Ronald Gene Simmons was a former Air Force Master Sergeant, a military veteran who had settled with his large family in a remote rural area. He was the unquestioned patriarch, controlling and authoritarian. Simmons' plot was not a moment of passion, but a week-long extermination driven by a cocktail of resentment, delusion, and an overwhelming, twisted sense of control. He had decided that his family was a failure, a source of shame, and that only by eliminating them entirely could he regain control and find peace. His plot was timed to coincide with the Christmas
holidays, ensuring his victims would all be home. The massacre began on December 22, 1987. He started with his wife, Rebecca, and his oldest son, Gene, at their trailer home. He then began, systematically, to eliminate the rest of his family members, who arrived over the next few days. He murdered his remaining children, their spouses, and his grandchildren, one by one, as they arrived for the holiday gathering. To cover the horrific crime, he meticulously stacked the bodies in a pit he had dug weeks earlier behind the home, covering them with dirt and personal belongings. He managed to murder 14 members of his own family, children, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law, and grandchildren, all during the supposed happiest week of the year. The domestic portion of his plot was complete by Christmas Day. He spent the next 3 days alone in the trailer, surrounded by the ghosts of his crime, before deciding his revenge was not yet complete. On December 28th, Simmons ventured out. He drove to a former workplace where he shot and killed a former supervisor. He then drove to a local convenience store where he shot and wounded a young woman, and then drove to a lawyer's office where he shot and killed a law clerk, bringing his total victim count to 16. This spree was a terrifying final act, a lashing out against the world that he felt had wronged him. The police apprehended him shortly after the convenience store shooting. When he was questioned, he finally revealed the horrifying secret hidden at his remote trailer park home. The sheer scale of the Familicide shocked the nation. The discovery of 14 bodies spanning 3 generations of one family, murdered over a week by their own patriarch, was almost beyond comprehension. Ronald Gene Simmons never expressed remorse. He claimed that the world was too evil and that he had performed a final act of liberation for his family. He waived all rights to appeal and was quickly tried and convicted. He requested the death penalty and was executed by lethal injection in 1990. The Christmas massacre of the Simmons family remains one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history. A chilling reminder of a father who, fueled by deep delusion and resentment, decided to use the holiest of seasons to carry out the most unholy of plots. The Simmons massacre was a methodical, week-long terror. But now we come to the one case that holds the gold standard for long-term calculated domestic cruelty. A story that begins with a desperate father sinking in debt and ends with a chilling act of methodical elimination that defined the term Familicide. The final father on our list used the ultimate betrayal to wipe out his wife, mother-in-law, and 2 young daughters in a single devastating moment. And he did it using his own car. This is the story of a man whose plot was the textbook definition of a cold-blooded domestic execution. Comment below who you think our final, most shocking father is, and subscribe so you don't miss the ultimate revelation. Number 1. Teo Gim Heng, the New Year's Day Betrayal. The attack, January 20th, 2017. The victims, his pregnant wife, Chong Pei Shan, and their 4-year-old daughter. The Republic of Singapore is known for its discipline and safety. The crime committed by Teo Gim Heng on January 20th, 2017 shattered that peaceful image. Teo was a man buckling under the immense pressure of financial debt, a pressure cooker that was about to explode within the walls of his own apartment. Teo's plot was born out of profound, selfish desperation. He had lost his job and was deep in debt from gambling and bad investments. His wife, Chong Pei Shan, was 6 months pregnant with their second child, and their daughter was only 4 years old. Teo saw his debts and responsibilities as a personal humiliation, and his only solution was to eliminate the problem entirely. He decided that instead of confronting his failure, he would eliminate his family and then kill himself, leaving a note to blame his financial problems. The crime began with a violent argument with his pregnant wife. He attacked her, strangling her to death with a towel in a furious, prolonged struggle. But the plot was not over. His 4-year-old daughter was a witness. He then strangled his small daughter, completing the double murder. Then he did something chillingly methodical. He spent the next 7 days living in the apartment with the bodies of his wife and daughter. He slept next to them, ate, and attempted to continue living a normal life amidst the horrifying aftermath of his actions. He was trying to summon the courage to complete the final part of his plot, his own suicide. For an entire week, no one suspected anything. The smell was contained, and Teo maintained the facade. It was only on January 28, 2017, a week after the initial murders, that the police arrived at the apartment for a welfare check after the family missed a Chinese New Year gathering. When the police entered, they found the gruesome scene. Teo, having failed to follow through on his own suicide, was immediately arrested. He confessed to the murders and revealed the horrific 7-day vigil he had kept over the bodies of his victims. The trial was complex, focusing heavily on Teo's state of mind. His defense argued that he suffered from major depressive disorder and that his ability to control his impulses was impaired. The prosecution, however, argued that his actions were premeditated, selfish, and motivated by a cold calculation to escape debt. The evidence of the week-long cohabitation with the bodies was a key factor, proving the chilling calmness and control he maintained after the initial murders. Teo Gim Heng was ultimately convicted of the double murder and sentenced to death by hanging. His case stands as a final, horrifying testament to the psychological depth of familicide. A father's ultimate betrayal, not in a moment of panic, but across a calculated, silent, week-long plot. Reflective note and conclusion. These 10 countdowns chronicle not the fall of empires, but the implosion of the most sacred institution, the family. The betrayal we have witnessed is not against a crown, but against the innocent trust placed in the title of father. From the calculated decades-long imprisonment by Josef Fritzl, to the quick, brutal violence of Chris Watts and the week-long terror of Ronald Simmons, these stories share a common, terrifying thread: control. The plot of the evil father is always a plot of entitlement, the belief that one's own life, one's own freedom, or one's own debt is more valuable than the lives of the people who depend on them. They sought a reset button, but instead they initiated a catastrophe that forever sealed their place in the dark annals of criminal history. The greatest lesson we can take from these 10 tragic accounts is this: the greatest dangers often lie not in the shadows of public life, but within the walls of what is supposed to be the safest place of all. If this deep dive into the calculus of betrayal made you pause, Subscribe to the channel for more history documentaries that pull back the curtain on the world's darkest secrets. And comment below, after seeing the full list, which of these 10 fathers do you believe executed the most cold-blooded, shocking plot? Your thoughts are important.